Hi there, I'm Dr. Dan, I'm a chiropractor, and today we're going to talk a little bit about spinal stability. And people ask me, or I'll see they're having some kind of issue with their back, and we'll talk a little bit about how it is that they can stabilize their spine. And you've heard a little bit about core muscle groups, and this is not that, because if any exercise you do helps your spine, it's going to be by this mechanism here that I'm going to explain. So let's start off with a cross section of the spinal cord. The spinal cord has several different parts. This part right here is what sends signals up and down to different levels. This part here is where signals come in. This is where signals go out. And of course you have exactly the same thing on the other side. Now let's draw a little spinal segment representation. Spinal segments have these little bony projections where muscles attach, and it's these little muscles in here that stabilize the spine. If you have any kind of spinal stability or any kind of good spinal control, it's because your body is controlling those tiny muscles right there. So that's what we're trying to get to. Now the signals that go there, in fact, let's switch colors. This part is what we're trying to get at right there. This part sends signals to the spinal segments to control that stability. This part is not under voluntary control. When that gets activated, it's because of this part right here is being activated by spinal segments, but also by the brainstem, which we'll draw in the three pieces up here. And of course other players are the cerebellum, neocortex, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But anyway, what happens is this. The cerebellum is a part that's very much involved in all motor control. The cerebellum sends signals up into this area, down into here, to activate this middle area that synchronizes all these different motor parts. Now let me talk about the other motor parts here for a second. This is anterior muscles. These are posterior muscles, and this is what's called autonomic. We'll start with that. Autonomic is things like blood supply, sweating, pupillary dilation, that sort of thing. Digestion, all that stuff is the autonomic. Posterior muscles are controlled by this section right here, posterior groups, and we'll talk upper body right now. That would be deltoids on back, trapezius, lats, rhomboids, that sort of thing. And here we've got biceps, pectoralis, these wrist flexors, that sort of group. So anyway, an important principle to know is that the anterior muscles and the posterior muscle groups each inhibit each other. So when you have activity here, you're going to get automatic inhibition on the posterior and vice versa. Now the problem is that the anterior have a much better connection to your brain than the posterior groups. So that means that if you don't do something to maintain these posterior groups, little by little, the anteriors are going to take over. Now, if you look at a dog or a cat, they don't spend their life like we do, upright, walking around, because they can't inhibit these anterior groups, so it's always pulling them forward, and they spend their life on all fours. So, little by little, if we don't maintain the same type of balance that we have now, then we're also going to fold over and end up in a walker, which is like on our way back to all fours again. So the remedy for that, of course, is to exercise in a 3-to-1 ratio of posterior to anterior groups. And I'll explain that more later, because that's what this whole section is all about. So as you exercise, now if you go to a gym and look at people exercising, most people do it the opposite. They'll do 8,000 bicep things, and chest, but they pretty much ignore these posterior guys. Now, when you look at somebody who really has a well-developed back, you know that they get it, because they're exercising and they're spending a lot of time doing that hard work of keeping their back strong. So as you work on, and I'm talking that upper back, the rhomboids and traps and lats, so as you work on these groups here, it's going to feed back to do two things. One, it's going to activate these cerebellar pathways. It's going to help stabilize the spinal segments through these areas. But it's also going to help inhibit these anterior muscles so that you can maintain a nice, natural, upright posture. So if you find yourself having to try to work hard to maintain good posture, it's because you don't have this ratio is starting to break down. So anyway, another thing that we need to be aware of, the neocortex up here sends signals back down into the brainstem down into here to actively inhibit those guys too. So keeping yourself exercised will help activate neocortex, which will help keep the anterior muscles quieted down so that they don't take over and fold you over. But primarily you're going to be working these guys. So that's why I say work on a 3-to-1 ratio. So if you do one exercise for your pecs and biceps, you've got to do 3 times as much for these posterior guys. And so that's going to send signals back up into the cerebellum, into the brainstem, back down here to help maintain that anterior to posterior balance. And at the same time, you're going to activate spinal stability. So that's the effective way of maintaining 2 important things. One is a nice stable spine, and also that posterior to anterior ratio. That's going to keep you upright your whole life. So we don't want you walking around, you know, in one of these little walkers because you can't maintain an upright posture. So anyway, it's that simple. Again, I'm Dr. Dan, and I'm happy to give you this information. And thanks for listening.